Welcome back to The Move, where we're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible where Jacob uses voodoo witchcraft in order to secure a retirement plan. If you're wondering what in the world are we looking at, we're looking at Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 to 43. Today, hanging out with Pastor Ben Williams. Real quick, before we dive into the episode, I do want to address the elephant in the room. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, if you're wondering why in the world, Justin, does it look like you're sitting on a camp chair in an empty living room? It's because I'm sitting on a camp chair in an empty living room. In the last episode, we kind of broke the news, I think, for the first time on the podcast, that Emily and I had moved to Hawaii to help plant a church online. We're still figuring out what that looks like, and we'll have more to share in the weeks and months to come. But we finally found an apartment. It's been like a week of searching, and one burden is off our shoulders, and now the next burden of like furniture and get stuff for the house and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because in today's passage, there was something that was said that Jacob quotes, and it's later in verse 30. And he asks a question and he says, when can I start providing for my own family? And I just couldn't help but think like, that's exactly the kind of train of thought that I'm on right now. It's like, how do I provide for my family? It is a challenge to do that. I think just generally speaking, given the economy now, gas prices are like through the roof for everyone. But to try and figure out how to do that while on a missionary kind of budget on the islands of Hawaii. Ben, you know what that's like. I mean, you moved to Hawaii recently to pursue ministry. And I don't know, is this a question that you have for yourself? Like, what about the future? What do I do?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, especially, that ministry budget doesn't always feel like there's a lot left over to provide for the future. It feels, okay, this is going to sound really bad, but it almost, I don't even know if I should say it. Okay.
Say it.
It sometimes feels like, and you may feel this way too, that like the church is Laban and we as like ministry workers are Jacob. And we, although we're working for him and getting sustained, there's not a ton left over to be like, hey, let me take care of my family. Let me put away for the future. It's kind of like this, I don't know, like just enough to sustain. And it seems like that's kind of what Jacob's saying, right? Because he obviously has enough to live on. But he's like, right. When am I actually going to be able to start building my own equity? Like, I'm building your equity and you're feeding me for it. But like, when do I get my equity? And I could almost feel that and it's such a blessing to live in a parsonage, but there's like a level of like, I'm building zero equity.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see the relatability to it. Obviously, neither one of us feel even the least bit that we're complaining. I mean, we're
I'm not
Hawaii.
Bitter about it.
And even if I wasn't in Hawaii, I would say that I have not been bitter about it either. Serving the Lord is a privilege and it's an honor. And I'm really grateful that that's how I get to spend my life. But it is a question that's in the back of my mind. And it's exciting to see that Jacob is starting to think about this. And it's really interesting because there's an acknowledgement on Laban's part that Jacob's done quite a bit for him. Like the reason why he seems to be succeeding, the reason why he seems to be prospering financially is actually because of Jacob's presence.
Yeah. He even says, he says, I divined. Like I went to someone who does like voodoo to figure out, why am I doing so unreasonably good right now? Like, it's like Laban recognizes, my business is thriving and I don't know why. And so he goes to like, apparently a diviner, a sorcerer of some sort, and is like, hey, tell me what's going on. And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's Jacob. Because Jacob has a really big, strong God. And because he's here, you're doing great. So probably hang on to him. And that's when he gets like uncomfortable.
I think it's so cool because this is just yet again one of the many ways that God is fulfilling his promise, right? In you, in your seed, will all nations be blessed. And we are seeing in a small sense how Laban and his family is being blessed by this. And there's this recognition of it. And it's just interesting because he's like, okay, whatever you need, whatever you want, like it's yours. And yet there's this scheme in the background of still like, this is the guy that's been taking care of me for all these years. He's the husband to two of my daughters, which is already weird in and of itself. But even in the middle of all that, Laban's like, all right, how can I screw him again?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's super weird because this is kind of the disposition of those who don't believe in the abundance. Like, it's kind of a disposition of whatever I have is fleeting and I need to really like figure out how to take and keep. And it's like this idea of trying to control what they have because they're so afraid of losing it. it's such an interesting contrast because Jacob has the exact opposite disposition, which is, I mean, wild because he's come a long way. Because if you remember at the beginning of this whole story, his entire disposition is let me deceive and try to control and get, not trusting in God. And Laban now kind of has taken over that, I mean, that disposition where he's trying to trick and deceive so that he can control and receive. Whereas Jacob feels completely comfortable in that God is guiding and taking care of him so that he can even do something wild like he does later on, where he says, hey, listen, you know those sheep that are really, really rare and spotted? Just give me those. And it's like he's completely confident that even if he kind of takes the short end of the stick, it's not about the short end of the stick. It's about the fact that God is there blessing him.
It's such a good take-home point that God is absolutely fulfilling his promise. He is looking out for him. He doesn't have to be reaching anymore. But when I was reading through this, I was thinking to myself, I mean, maybe this is because like I never grew up on a farm and I'm so ignorant about livestock. I'm so ignorant about sheep in particular. But I was thinking about striped and spotted sheep. Was that the language? Yeah, speckled or spotted. Striped. Yeah. I was just like, I don't know that I've ever seen a sheep like that. I mean, all the felt boards and all the times that I read, you know, the old MacDonald had a farm. Like, I don't think that I've ever really seen that. So, is it literally just that sheep or that have some kind of physical? Is it a deformity? Is it a certain type of sheep? Like, what is indicated by this classification of sheep here?
Yeah, it's like a defect. It's like an abnormality. And so I don't know the actual statistics, but like, let's say, and again, I don't know the statistics, so you can Google it and you can figure it out. But like, let's say out of 100 sheep, let's say 10 of them come out speckled just because it's abnormal. And so what he's saying basically is, hey, don't give me anything. And what's happening here is when he comes up to Laban and he says, I'm going to go, what are you going to send me with? There's a law in Deuteronomy that basically if someone works for you as an indentured servant and then they end up leaving, you have to send them off with a gift. You can't send them empty-handed. So Jacob's kind of like, hey, I'm heading out. Where's my gift? And Laban is like, what can I do? I'll give you anything to get you to stay. And he says, let me get like the short end of the stick. Let me just pick out the ones that are defective. Let me get the ones that are not wanted, that are not desired, that are less frequent. The ones that presumably are sick in some way, right? Because back then they would have thought that these sheep were probably not as strong of ones. And so he says, just let me go pick, and whichever ones come out. So very rarely when a sheep comes out this way, let me just have that, and then I'll stay with you.
So it's interesting. He asks for the short end of the stick, and you would think that Laban would, out of gratitude, be like, yeah, absolutely. Like this is definitely what you're worth. I mean, he literally said like anything you want. And yet he goes and he hides all of these different animals from Jacob. And then Jacob does what I can only look at as voodoo, because he does this thing with a stick and some branches and some trees. And basically, voila, like now all the strong sheep are giving offspring that are exactly the description of the abnormal sheep. Like they're all spotted, they're all speckled, they're all black, they all have streaks on them. And it's just like, what is happening here? And again, this is where like, man, you know, maybe in future seasons of the move, instead of just having a bunch of pastors who have all been to seminary, maybe we ought to get like a shepherd on every once in a while. Cause like, I feel like there's something missing here.
That would be so great. They would just add so much. But what's really interesting is actually the answer to this question is kind of found in chapter 31, where basically someone kind of asks him what's going on. And he's like, well, when I was making this deal, God said, look up to the heaven. And when I looked up to the heaven, he said, all of these strong sheep are going to be looking like this. And so he's like, all right. So then he goes and he basically tells Laban, I'll take these ones, knowing that like God has already shown him which ones are going to be blessed and multiply the strong. And so it's really interesting. There's a lot of different opinions on why does he do these weird things with the sticks? Like, why does he keep he says like when they're breeding, when the strong ones are breeding, he just like goes and like puts out the sticks,
puts a stick in front of him,
backs away. Yeah. And so some scholars say, oh, well, he knew something about, you know, medicines that would make them be this way, or maybe it was a psychological thing. But I think more than anything, it's trying to help us understand that like this was God's provision. Like it was trying to help us understand that this was not by chance. This wasn't just willy-nilly that this happened, but it was Jacob fully trusting that God was going to bless him if God is the one that showed him. And so, I mean, maybe we'll get to heaven and Jacob will be like, yeah, no, I knew about this like different herb that would make them come out spotted, or, oh yeah, no, God showed me this weird psychological principle with sheep that they become what they see. I don't know what it's going to be. But the main push, the main force of this story is the idea that like God is the one that actually makes this shift happen. God is the one that is looking out for Jacob, even when he gets the short end of the stick. And what it really reminds me of, and I was talking to you about this a little bit earlier, is the story of Abram and Lot when they come to this promised land and they look to one side. I don't remember if it was the right or the left, maybe the right side. They look to the right side, let's see, and they see all of this beautiful valley land. And then they look to the left side and they see kind of rugged and not great land. And Abram in confidence says, Lot, like, which one do you want? And Lot says, oh, I want the one that's super lush, has the cities. I'm going to go down there. And Abram is completely satisfied going with the less blessed, quote unquote, the less blessed land, knowing that he goes with God and that wherever he goes with the blessing of God, that will be the place of abundance. He doesn't need something that looks good or traditionally has been good because he knows that he carries with him the very presence of God. Like he carries with him the blessing. Like everything around him could be literally nothing. And he is the one that actually brings the blessing. And it's kind of this same thing where Jacob understands, like he was a sheep herder for all of these years. Like he was looking after the flocks. He would understand this is not the good choice by human standards to take these like rare sheep if I want a lot of sheep. But he understands that whatever he chooses actually gets the blessing. He understands that he actually in himself brings the blessing to his situation. And so then he's not like worried about being taken advantage of. He's not worried. Like he couldn't care less that Laban is tricking him because he knows again, like what his blessing is coming from is God, which means like you can't take it from him. Like you are literally unable to take advantage of Jacob. And he knows this.
It helps me to understand why Jesus would say something so radical like forgiving your enemies 70 times 7. How later in the New Testament it would talk about how we should prefer other people like at a higher esteem than ourselves. And it seems as though that the push of scripture is for us to live so self-sacrificially that we literally give our lives away to others, and so that others would be blessed, and that we're turning the other cheek, we're going the extra mile, we're doing all these things for the sake of bringing a blessing to others. But I think that one of the common like question marks with that is like, well, if we really live that way, if we really follow that to its logical conclusion, then how am I going to take care of my family? Like Jacob is asking, right? How am I going to get this retirement plan? And it's just so interesting that if we have the realization that our blessing comes with us, that we carry the blessing like you were describing, as opposed to the blessing being found in circumstances, then I think we show up differently. We can show up with this confidence and this knowledge that, like in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5, that God has blessed us with every single blessing. Like if we have that frame of mind, we can enter into agreements that maybe we get the short end of the stick, but we can do so not being taken advantage of because we're doing it consciously because we're trying to bring the blessing to others.
Yeah. And there's no like fear in this. Like we can literally give away anything that we're prompted to give away by God, knowing that if he supplied it in the first place, like we have no fear. Like if I believe myself to have built my quote unquote empire, my empire of nothing personally, but like you might have a great empire, I don't know. But if you believe yourself to have built this empire and it's all on you and it's been all your hard work and no one gave it to you and it's all on you, then like you probably should, from that vantage, from that perspective, try to control and hoard. I mean, But if you actually realize that the kingdom of heaven has opened its storehouses and that's why you're blessed, then there is no fear in actually giving away and blessing other people. Because again, you didn't earn it. You didn't scrape it together yourself. You actually it was given to you. In that way, you can give it away knowing that the storehouses of heaven actually don't run dry. Like they are not going to run dry. You're good. Like your blessings come from him. You no longer need to fear giving them away.
So then it sounds like you, and I'll throw myself in the boat there too. You and I are both, even if our working relationship with the church was the kind of Jacob and Laban where we're building another person's empire. And what about myself?
Which
What
it's
about-
not. Which it's not.
Which it's not. We want to be completely clear on
Yeah,
that. But
please
even
don't
if it
fire
was-
me.
I love my job.
Yeah.
But even if it was, it would be the kind of thing that we would still happily do because we
Yeah.
get to follow God where he's going. We get to live with the confidence that the promise is like that we carry it. And so what a joy to spend this entire life giving it away, living for others. And I don't know, it's exciting. You know, people might feel like, I don't know if people feel this way or not, but I don't know. I live with this kind of latent insecurity now that I have to try and figure out how to communicate the story that my family, we all moved to Hawaii to be missionaries. Everyone's like, oh yeah, of course, you know, when God calls you to Hawaii, you got to go. And so I have that kind of insecurity in the back of my mind. But if you follow the last 15, 20 years of my life, like there have been many moments of these kind of like crazy sacrifices where we drop everything and move. Like we've lived in so many different places. I lived on floors in churches for like a decade. It's just, I guess I want to just like point out the fact that, you know what, following God wherever is awesome, even if it's not Hawaii. And it's something that even if it never led to Hawaii, I want to say that I would still feel the same way, that I'm excited to live a life following God where he's calling. And I don't know, we don't do this a lot on the show, right? We don't really try and say this, and this is what you should do, and this is what you should take away. But I don't know if there's a way for me to encourage others who feel like maybe they're getting the short end of the stick in pursuing God. If there's a way for me to use this moment to encourage you and say, hey, hang on there. There's something beautiful that's coming. God sees it when we get the short of the stick, and yet the promise is still faithful. God is working in you and God's working through you, and it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like, man, getting the short end of the stick, I think is impossible for Christians. One, because blessings go with us, like we're talking about, but two, because like we literally know this world is not the end. Like we know that even if we don't see the blessings come pouring down, like some people did in the Bible, like we know that we actually get eternal life with the one that loves us, that is the all-powerful creator of the universe. And even if this life is you continually getting the short end of the stick, like that's not the end of the story. This is just the very, very beginning.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we see in the life of Jesus, right? He lived an entire life getting the short end of the stick, and yet his is the name upon which every knee bows. And it's just, I remember hearing when I was growing up, a pastor used the phrase of like the kingdom of God is like an upside down kingdom, that the way up is down. And Jesus said it in other ways, the way to find your life is to lose it, is to give it away. And I think that there's something there. And it's cool because we don't have to feel like as we're doing it, we're missing out, because we carry the promise. Hey, before you go, I wanted to tell you guys about the book club. We actually have started the book club over the last couple of weeks, and it's been a fantastic experience, and I would love for you to be able to be a part of it. We are trying to gear the book club specifically for people who are wanting to experience this gospel, good news, this message of freedom for yourself. The book, of course, is titled Free from Sin, The Audacious Claim of Gospel Freedom and What It Means for You. And so if you're one of these people, you're like, man, I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm intrigued, but I have a bunch of questions and I'm not sure exactly how to start, how to even like where to start and all the things. Or maybe you even want to share this message with a friend or a family member who you've been trying to, but don't quite know all the ways to go about it. The good news is we're going step by step, every chapter of the book. And it's been such a fun experience. I just wanted to extend the invitation to you. It is on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which for me now with the move to Hawaii is like 7 in the morning. So if I may or may not on occasion say something incoherent since I'm still trying to wake up at that hour of the day. But we would love to have you. If you're interested in joining the book club, you only have to do one thing. You just text the word book club to the number 808-204-4372. That's 808-204-4372. And basically an hour before the Bible study starts, we will text message you a link. You just click it and join. And it's really fun. One of the questions that we get as a follow-up is, what about international people? Yes, international people can participate. Obviously, you'll have to figure out the time zone adjustment for yourself. The texting service doesn't work for international people from what I gather. So if you are trying to get the link, just send me a message on Instagram at jkhoe, JKHOE, and I'll send you the link. You set it as an alert in your calendar, and we'll see you there. Again, the number is 808-204-4372. Just text the word book club, and we'll see you there.